Hello, Room 305 Biology. We are beginning our lessons on evolution, and this is Chapter 16. This video is basically going to talk us through Section 1 of Chapter 16, or the Introduction to Evolution. Start off with a quote here by Charles Darwin. There's a picture of Charles Darwin. You probably heard of him before, or at least heard the word Darwin used. And his quote is, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And change is italicized there to show that it isn't always the strongest or the smartest, but sometimes the one that makes it through a challenge. So why do we learn about evolution in school? If you look at all of the biology concepts that you could learn about, this one, evolution, probably causes the most, or brings up the most controversy, and there are many teachers that sometimes feel pressured to not teach about evolution. So here's a couple of reasons why. This is how we look through our history and find out what happened to past species. And that could be for curiosity, but it also could be for learning lessons. It's interesting. It's relevant. The reason being is all life is a product of some sort of evolution, including all the things we learn about in biology. And I think we've talked about that before, how as you take biology and learn about things, when you get to the end of the year, everything kind of comes back together and it all intertwines and makes sense. It explains where we came from and who our ancestors were, and I think we're all interested in our own lives and our own origin. We live in a changing world, which we are noticing firsthand right now. What species are under threat? What animals and plants that we cherish are threatened as far as dying out or becoming extinct. GM. Here this means genetically modified. So are genetically modified foods really bad for you? How about antibiotic resistance? Diseases. We've heard a lot about viruses recently. And your beliefs and your knowledge of evolution can coexist. And I know some people struggle with that, and I do understand that. So I'm not trying to bash or tell you that any of your religious beliefs are incorrect. That is not what my job is, but I want you to understand evolution from a science standpoint. And I guess the thing I always mention to people if they ask, and I haven't had a lot of people argue about teaching evolution, but thought of this one time. Do you go to church to work out algebra problems? Probably not, right? So every place has its, or every learning has its place. Right? We go to math to learn math. We go to science to learn science. We go to church to learn about religion. Okay, I need to drag. Hopefully you guys can see that. Not a day goes by that I'm not thinking about evolution. That was a quote that was said to me by my college evolution professor, Dr. Bruce Jensen at Jamestown College, and that was the first thing he said to us on our first day of evolution class. And here we are all sitting in the lecture room going, what a weirdo. Who would ever think about evolution all the time, or every day? You know, we thought this guy was pretty strange, but as we got further into the class, we realized that you can think about it every day, even if you're not, huge science geek, you can think about evolution every day because it's all around us. This particular class I thought was cool because Dr. Jensen was teaching at Jamestown College, which was a private college, and we had a lot of students in there who were religion majors, and they were taking evolution, and they tried to stir the pot every day and, cause arguments and stuff. But on the last day of class, it was kind of neat to see a science audience and a religion audience kind of come together and give the guy a standing ovation for what he did teaching us. It was really a cool thing. All right, so what is evolution? Evolution is a change over time. I think that's the easiest way to think of it, is things changing over time. And this time is longer than, typically, not always, but typically our lifespan. So sometimes it's tough to see it from that perspective. It's an explanation of how modern organisms evolved or changed over long periods of time through descent from common ancestors. And so Darwin, will talk about his journey here soon, but 2 pictures here. You've probably heard of this book, On the Origin of Species. I have never read this book. I do own a copy. Tried to read it, but it takes a special book for me to really absorb myself in a book and read. So maybe someday. And then a picture of his finches. And this was actually his main organism. And we'll reference that again on a further slide. All right, Darwin's journey. So back in the 1830s, as you can see from the picture there, he was basically on a 5-year voyage, and his job was to map the coastline of South America. And so we can see from leaving Europe, and we can see his path here. He traveled down along South America. Make sure I go the right way. And also in that journey, he was collecting plants and animals. And he showed that the living world is constantly changing. We hear about drug-resistant bacteria, illnesses evolving. There's another video I have posted that I want you to watch on the coronavirus and the evolution of the coronavirus, and I think it's a very informative video. Our book references the bird flu, but future textbooks are undoubtedly going to reference what we're going through right now. So you guys are experiencing firsthand evolution at work. He made many observations. He was a collector. Ever since he was a kid, he was interested in watching animals and looking at the different variety in animals, insects, birds. A lot of students, I think, or a lot of people in general, don't see all of those. We don't appreciate the diversity, so to speak. My field biology collects 40 insects as a project. Notice he collected 68 species of beetles in one day. Of course, he was in a Brazilian rainforest, so they're going to have more variety. But he filled his notebook with habitats, characteristics of everything he everything he observed, and he noticed 3 main patterns. We're going to talk about those patterns next. The first one is varying globally. So you got to think about the wording here, globally. And the way to think about this is he noticed that around the globe, ecologically similar animal species, okay, so similar yet they were different, and they inhabited separated but ecologically similar habitats. So take a grassland, for example. He noticed there were grasslands in varying continents around the world, or forests in varying continents around the world. And as he visited these countries and these continents, he saw similarities. For instance, a flightless large bird, I think if we saw a picture of a flightless large bird, most of us would probably say it's an ostrich, but maybe you didn't know that there's also things called rheas and emus that live in other parts of the world that are very similar to ostriches. Rabbits, which we are all familiar with, that are found in Europe and in our backyards. They were missing from areas in Australia and South America. But filling the role of those rabbits, kangaroos. And we don't see kangaroos in England or the Americas. And so you may not think a rabbit and a kangaroo are that similar, but they do have some similarities. Also, species vary locally. So he noticed that different related animal species occupied different habitats or differing habitats within a local area. Okay. For instance, in South America, 2 species of flightless birds differed in not only their temperature of their habitat, but also the type of grass that was there. And you can't talk about Darwin without referencing the Galapagos Islands. The tortoises, which he is famous for studying, differed in shape of their shell. And finches, of course, as we saw and will see, in their beak shapes. So a couple of observations Darwin made. His Galapagos turtles, notice we have differences in their shell, saddle-backed versus domed back, and also their neck and leg length. Okay, and so what Darwin saw was tortoises that lived in areas with many tall plants had longer necks and legs, and those that lived in areas that were predominantly short plants and mosses had short necks and short legs. And here shows a couple of those tortoises and also the islands they were found on. And kind of interesting to see the Galapagos Islands. And some of those islands weren't as big as others, but it shows a little bit about how they were separated. And the finches he studied, of course, all of these are finches, yet we see that some are categorized as what we call a tree finch, and some are categorized as a ground finch, and that applies to where they are found feeding. And we can see that there is a correlation between shape of the bill and function of the bill, crushing, probing, grasping, parrot-like, and what they feed upon. So, of course, structure and function relationship. And his third pattern that he noticed was species varying over time. And so Darwin was a collector of fossils, remnants of past life, and he noticed that some of these fossils looked like living organisms and others didn't. And so he put together the pieces, theorizing that some of these species were related to South American ancestors. How? When did these things occur? We may not have all those answers, but notice this interesting animal called a Glyptodon and how much it resembles a armadillo. Obviously there's differences, but there's a lot of interesting similarities. And here's a map that shows the location of the Galapagos Islands. Notice it is right on the equator, and as we get further into ecology, we'll talk about some of the importances of that fact and how things grow and develop, and how our ecosystems differ in an equatorial area compared to an area like we live in. Thank you for watching. I'm almost over my time limit of 15 minutes, so you can go back, watch this video at any time to review any of the concepts. Please go and find the Introduction to Evolution exit ticket and fill that out for me, and that will function as one of your grades. All right, we will resume talking about evolution on, looks like Monday of next week. Thank you.